Hey guys, it's Jim here, and today we're going to be talking about the vibrato systems that come stock on Fender guitars, with the exception of maybe one or two of the oddities you're not going to find in production these days. And we're going to have a bonus at the very end. But before we get into the specifics, if you are having tuning issues with any of these instruments, it doesn't matter what it is, quite frankly, there's two things that you should be doing whenever you restring and reset up your guitar. The first is, after you get the strings on, you tune them to pitch, then you're going to want to stretch the strings. I mean, really pull. Around the 12th fret's pretty good. You want to keep applying pressure up and down the fretboard. That is going to make sure the string is going to be ready to go. It's less likely to drop out of tune. The next thing you're going to want to do after you do that, you take some of this. This is some nut lubricant. After the string is stretched out, you want to place it right in the grooves. A little bit of this stuff goes a long way. You don't need to overdo it. By doing those two things, you are setting yourself up for success. So I'm going to bring the bench over here. We're going to move the camera. And we're going to get started. Okay, we're going to start with the most common one, and that is a Stratocaster. Obviously, it's got a screw in, but some of them are going to have a pop in. You're going to be able to notice that there is a little bit of a gap where the bridge and the body are in between. About 1/8 of an inch is typically what you're going to find here. And that's called a floating tremolo system. So that allows the guitar to go both up and down. If this was just down onto the body itself, sitting flush against it, you'd only be able to go down. But because it is floating, you can go down or you can go up. Now overall, like a Stratocaster, this is a great all-around tremolo system. There's a reason why they haven't really altered it all too much over the years. You'll see some modern ones have a 2-point trem. All of the vintage ones, they have the 6 right in here. But you can go from anywhere from really subtle to full on. Stays in tune just fine. And before we head on to the next guitar here, if you don't like the amount of tension like this one, it feels kind of tight. It's a little too tight for my liking. One thing that you can do is you can actually replace the springs that come in the back. Typically these are going to come with 3 long springs. They're going to be pictured on the screen attached to a claw. You can always alter the claw a little bit because in theory here, the bigger strings are going to require a little bit more tension. You can alter it so it's a little slanted. Some people have success with that. But if it just seems way too tight, replacing the strings themselves when you're doing a string change is very, very easy to do. It's not expensive, and it's a fun way to experiment and find something you really like. Next up, we're going to be talking about the one that comes on the Jazzmaster and also on the Jaguar. And this is my favorite out of all the tremolo systems Fender makes because to me, it is by far the most abusable once it's dialed in correctly. Now, one common mistake people will do with these guitars and wonder why it's not staying in tune or why strings are popping out, it's because the bridge here, notice how it's lifted up a bit. There's a lot of space in between here. You want to be able to create the break angle to create that tension so that you're not going to have any issues. If this is too low, you're not going to be getting the correct angle on it, and thus that's going to lead with problems either with the strings potentially popping out of the sockets or with tuning stability. However, one thing that can happen here is when you raise the bridge enough to create the proper break angle for the strings, your action might get a little too high for your liking, especially on these kinds of frets. And that's where we go into a technique that has been used for decades. You just want to throw a little bit of a shim into the neck. It will raise up the neck. A tapered shim for me works best because it acts a little bit more naturally into it and it gradually lets the guitar ease back. You don't need anything too big. You could get away with a business card folded over and cut. That's, one way to do it, but me personally, if I'm going to be working on my guitars, it's not that expensive to get one that's pre-cut from StewMac. You can experiment anywhere from a quarter to a half, all the way up to a full. You can even stack those to create, your perfect feeling instrument. Another tidbit of information, if you have an American reissue, you'll see this button right here. That is a lock. What does the lock mean? It won't prevent the trem from working. However, it will do this. We can go up and down with it disengaged. When I do engage the lock, however, I can go down, not going up. So what it does is it locks the guitar from being able to pull up. It's good in pinch situations, and some people, they prefer just to do that anyways to begin with. Me, I don't really use the lock. But the pros of this system, to me, it is by far the most abusable out of all of them. Once you do have the correct break angle here going up from the bridge and everything else is working really well, this is just, there's nothing that beats the feel of this. It's just the most fluid motion. It's not too sloppy, but it gives you just enough resistance where you can really feel confident bending this thing like crazy. And there's a reason why this is such a popular tremolo system for a lot of surf guitarists. Next, we're going to be checking out the Fender Mustang Vibrato, and this one also has a few little tips that I'd like to give people that can help with the rideability and the feel of the trem itself. One thing I like to do on these kinds of vibratos is when I get the guitar, I'll play it until the strings are no good on it, unless I get it and the strings are already shot. Then I'll remove this itself. It's very simple. You only remove these 5 screws in here. You're going to remove the actual vibrato system from the guitar. There's nothing really holding it in there. You're going to flip it over. There's going to be 2 springs on both sides here. I lower them to the lowest possible slots that they can go in, and then I put the guitar back together. So what'll happen is the higher that the spring is, well, in relation to the body itself, the closer it is to the body itself here, it's going to actually alter where the tremolo arm sits. So right here, because I have it set where it is, it's nice and flat. It's in a good location for me. I like that a lot. But the cigar tube, because of the tension, if you have it higher up, it's going to tilt back a little bit like this, causing the arm to stand up more. I mean, this is really exaggerated, but it's very noticeable when you do have a Mustang set up like that. Same thing with the Jazzmaster and the Jaguar as far as what I like to do with the break angle of them. A little bit more, and then you're okay. I don't have any tuning problems with this. And one thing to note, when you're using the arm of this, and after you've gotten everything all set up and everything like that, if it's still going out of tune, you want to check the very bottom, the plate isn't hitting the tip of this arm, because if you're doing that, you're going to be inviting unwelcome problems as far as tuning stability goes. And again, this is a really, really solid overall system. Often overlooked out of the 3 of them, this one to me, when set up correctly, is very reliable. It's pretty abusable. But when it comes to the arm itself, you don't want to over tighten it, because if you over tighten it, you're pretty much locking it in the position that it's in as far as moving left and right. And if you're strumming, you can already kind of see we can have some problems potentially. So you want to tighten it just enough so you can move it out of the way and have it sit. But the problem is, if you don't tighten it enough at all, this is going to get loose. And unlike the other ones, this is going to fall right out. And you're going to need an Allen wrench that goes in right here to retighten this thing back in. So if you're gigging out with the guitar and you want it a little loose, make sure that you bring it with you, or before you start your gig, just tighten up a little bit more to make sure that it's something that's not going to come loose, because I've played gigs where the arm of this has fallen off from me kind of jumping around like a lunatic and abusing it a little bit too much. But again, in practice, you can go from anywhere from very subtle and tasteful, right back to tune, to pretty aggressive. Perfect. Okay, I know what you're thinking. This is not a Fender guitar. This is my ES Les Paul with a Bigsby on it. And I only am going to bring up this and talk about the Bigsby because you'll find it on Telecasters pretty commonly, actually. It's not that rare of a thing to have installed, and it's not that difficult of a thing for you to install on a Telecaster yourself, should you decide to do so. And out of all the vibrato systems that we've talked about so far, this one is by far the least abusable. So if you want something that you can really hammer on, I would look for other options outside of a Bigsby. It is very good, though, at the subtleties. But if you were to really smack this, which I'm not going to do, this is a very expensive guitar. I wish I had a cheaper one to demo this on. You will knock this out of tune pretty quick if you really start hammering this home in the way in which I use the Jazzmaster or even the Mustang tremolo system. And the final kind of setup and helping to keep in tune advice I'm going to give you on any of these, not just the Bigsby, that nut lubricant that we were talking about at the front, a little bit in the saddles as well. You just want to remove and kind of minimize as much friction as possible. So a well-lubricated guitar is going to function better. It's just like your car engine. It's just going to be a lot smoother sailing. Friction is no bueno. And that was my brief overview of the tremolo systems commonly found on Fender instruments. I did not mention 2, the Collar or the Floyd Rose. because they're both pretty uncommon. The collar much more so. I had a Japanese Strat, an SQ serial number that had a collar on it, and it actually was pretty good. It reminded me a little bit of the Floyd Rose, and it was similar in that kind of style, but for me, they're not ideal kind of tremolo systems, and I don't find myself playing, that kind of music the majority of the time. Another tremolo that's really good that you're not going to find on a Fender is the one in the PRS. That molded tremolo, that is fantastic. It's like a Strat one on steroids. However, if you're interested in seeing a full setup of any of these offset guitars in particular, because I know there's a billion in regards to the Stratocaster and a lot of Bigsby stuff too with Tellys, I'm fairly certain of that. If you'd like to see me kind of go through how I do things step by step with either the Jag, the Mustang, or the Jazzmaster, let me know in the comments down below. But other than that, that's where I'm going to be, where I'm going to wrap up today's video. Maybe you learned something, maybe it was a waste of your time, but hopefully I at least entertained you a little bit. So leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe if you haven't subscribed to the channel already, and I will see you tomorrow for another guitar related video. Take it easy, you guys.